Hello, in today's video, I'm going to be compiling a list of my favorite books of all time, and I'm going to be trying to persuade you to read them all. And I'm going to be titling this list Joe's Ultimate Book Recommendations. When curating this list, I was thinking about which books are God tier, which ones are my Roman Empire books. You know, the type of stories that live rent-free in your head. You know, looking at authors that have crafted stories that have changed the trajectory of my life. Like when I'm literally going to bed every night, I am thinking about these books and how good they are. When I'm going about my day to day, they are lingering in the back of my mind. Like I can't emphasize how perfect these books are. 0 notes from me. Also, if you for some reason do not like these books, please don't tell me. Your opinions are not valid here. Now let's get into it. I think a really fitting place to start this video is by talking about my favorite book of all time, which is Babel by R.F. Kuang, or as it's known by its longer name, Babel, or the Necessity of Violence, an arcane history of Oxford's Translators' Revolution. I think you would technically classify this book as adult fantasy, which isn't necessarily wrong, but I would more so classify it as historical fiction with a dash of fantasy or magical realism. In 1828, our main character, Robin Swift, is orphaned by cholera in Canton, China. One day, Robin is brought to London by the mysterious Professor Lavelle. While in London, he trains for years to learn ancient Greek, Latin, and Chinese, to prepare him to enroll at Oxford University's prestigious Royal Institute of Translation, aka Babel. Babel is the world center for translation and also for magic. While there, the students learn silver working, which is the art of imbuing language into silver bars, which then produces magic. This has made the British unparalleled in power. For Robin, Babel serves as a utopia where he gets to seek out knowledge, but unfortunately, knowledge obeys power. And as a Chinese boy raised in Britain, Robin realizes that serving Babel means that he is betraying his motherland. As Robin progresses through his studies, he finds himself caught between Babel and the shadowy Hermes Society, which is an organization dedicated to stopping imperialism. When Britain pursues an unjust war with China over silver and opium, Robin must decide: can powerful institutions be changed from within, or does revolution always require violence? I would literally classify Babel as a modern classic at this point. I realize it only came out in 2022, but it really is just that much of a compelling read, and so unique and unlike anything else that has come out up until this point. I really like how Babel handles colonialism and the importance of language, as well as morality and sacrificing yourself to do the right thing. Throughout the book, you really see our protagonist Robin grapple with whether his life at the prestigious Institute of Translation is worth more to him than his Chinese identity and heritage. What must he truly give up to live a life full of knowledge and power? If you're someone who really enjoys a found family plotline, you're gonna really like this book. Robin, Rami, Victoria, Letty. R.F. Kuang did a really great job of taking all of these characters with different pasts and different life experiences and bringing them all together. She also made me really care about these characters, which is really important. I didn't realize how much I really did care about these characters and their group dynamic until the last third of the book. The ending of this book is so powerful. It felt like my heart was literally being ripped out of my chest. That's how many emotions I was feeling. One of the most powerful aspects of this book that I still think about constantly is how we never learn Robin's real true name. And this really highlighted that one of the costs of colonialism and whitewashing is the sense of identity and belonging. If you're going to pick up literally any book that I recommend in this video, please have it be this one. Next, we have what might be my favorite romance book of all time, which is The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. This is an adult contemporary romance with a dash of magical realism. Our main character, Clementine, has been living in her aunt's New York City apartment since she inherited it. And since her aunt died, she's kind of been coasting through life until one day she wakes up and finds a strange man in her apartment. Her aunt always told her about how special and unique this apartment was, and she never realized how true that was until she realizes that the apartment can jump through time. She finds out that this man is from 7 years in the past. I read this book post-election, and honestly, it was everything I needed in that moment. This book isn't simply just a romance, it's also commentary on what it means to live a fulfilled life. I love a book with a time-traveling plotline. I'm gonna eat it up every time. Like, my favorite movie of all time is Your Name. So I was designed to love this book, and I did. Obviously, my favorite part about this was the romance between Ivan and Clementine. I really enjoyed how subtle it was. It was a slow burn, which I really enjoy in my romance books. It was also just the small things that Ashley Poston put into this book that really worked for me. It was in the soft glances that they gave to each other while cooking in the kitchen, and the intimacy in which they danced while listening to a neighbor play their cello. Miss Ashley Poston literally slayed here. She ate and left no crumbs. Like, literally, chef's kiss. No notes. I really want to talk about a series that a lot of us have read, but it's where my reading journey started, so it should definitely make this list, which is the Hunger Games series by Suzanne Collins. It's YA dystopian fantasy, but at this point we might as well just be calling it nonfiction. Could you survive on your own in the wild when everyone is out to make sure that you don't live to see the next morning? In the ruin of what was once North America lives the nation of Panem, a shining capital surrounded by 12 districts. The capital is harsh and cruel and keeps the districts in line by forcing them to send one boy and one girl every year into the Hunger Games, which is a fight to the death that is televised on live TV. 16-year-old Katniss Everdeen, who lives alone with her sister and her mother in District 12, regards it as a death sentence when she decides to volunteer to take her sister's place in the games. This series as a whole was such a cultural reset. Like I've mentioned before, this series started my reading journey when I was 14. There's something so addictive about how this story was written and how it was told, and I'm sure that's why it became such a phenomenon. Katniss was the perfect narrator for this story because she's so flawed, but also extremely unique at the same time. And she was also someone that you could see yourself being when you were reading the book. You could even say relatable, which is why people liked her so much. It's the way she was strong and reserved, but also could show emotion when it mattered. And you could see that emotion when she volunteers to go into the games to protect Prim, or when she tries to help Rue stay alive in the arena. I truly believe with everything in me that Suzanne Collins is a genius. This book was written for a young adult demographic, and yet you can still very much enjoy this series as an adult. I didn't necessarily pick up on all the societal and political rhetoric that was put into this book the first time I read it. However, every single time I've read it since, I've picked up on more of the nuances from the story. This series as a whole, well, back when it was a trilogy, was a masterclass on how to write a trilogy. Catching Fire is my favorite book in the series, and I really like how it built on the foundation that was set in the Hunger Games and expands it even further. Mockingjay is my least favorite book in the series, but it's also definitely still written well and thought-provoking. That bittersweet ending made so much sense, and it was such a great send-off for us as readers. I will literally never forget the series for as long as I live. Now I'm going to segue into another YA series that has really stuck with me, which is the Remnant Chronicles by Mary E. Pearson. This is YA romantasy. The House of Morrigan is steeped in tradition, but some of these traditions Leah cannot abide by, like having to marry someone she's never met to secure an alliance. Completely over it and ready for a new life, Leah escapes to a distant village on the morning of her wedding. She settles into the village among the common folk and is very intrigued when two random strangers come to town, not realizing that one of them is the jilted prince she was supposed to marry, and the other is an assassin sent to kill her. This trilogy is such quintessential romantasy to me. The reason why a lot of romantasy books don't hit for me is because a lot of times authors don't really understand how to balance the romance and the fantasy elements. Just because romance is the main plot does not mean that you get to just completely ignore the fantasy elements. Cough, powerless cough. Like, I still expect great world building and a unique magic system. Mary E. Pearson does a great job of balancing these two aspects. She created such an intricate fantasy world from the ground up. While magic isn't super prevalent in this story, it's definitely more low-key. It's executed extremely well. This series is so dramatic in the best possible way. With names like The Kiss of Deception, The Heart of Betrayal, and The Beauty of Darkness, it better be. This series also introduced one of the best love triangles I've ever read. Love triangles are supposed to be tricky because you're not supposed to know who the main character is going to end up with, but usually in most books, it's extremely obvious, which is why love triangles aren't executed well most of the time. Like, Katniss was never going to end up with Gale, and Bella was never going to end up with Jacob. But who was Leah going to end up with? When I was reading this series, I had no idea. And I loved that so much. I will say, I was always a Rafe girly. Sorry, Kaden. A newer book to make this list, but the best book I read last year was Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong. This is an adult dark academia book. For 20 years, Skiona has devoted her entire life to studying magic, fueled by the mad desire to achieve the impossible, which is to be the first woman to ever be admitted to the High Magistracy. When she finally passes the entrance exam and becomes a High Mage, she finds that her challenges have just begun. Like I said, this was the best book I read in 2024. It's not even just a book, it's also commentary on morality. Emma Wong paints a vivid picture on what it's like to live in a society that quite literally values the few over the many. Gee, I wonder what that sounds like. And while reading this, you will question what it means to be a good person. And it's not even really just that, you will also question what it means to be human. Sciona, our main character, is very flawed, which is honestly my favorite type of character to read about. I loved the development of her character throughout this story. She's constantly having to unlearn all the societal biases that were taught to her as she's presented with new information that contradicts with everything that she always thought was true. The magic system that was developed in this book is one of the most complex I've ever read. It was also very unique and unlike anything I've ever read before. It's analytical and rooted in scientific realism and reasoning, and it's described to the reader extremely well. Blood Over Brighthaven is just such a unique, beautiful piece of literature. It's also extremely thought-provoking. Like, when you finish this book, because the ending is insane, you will be sitting and you will be thinking about it for a while, I promise. You need to read this book. Next, I want to talk about my favorite duology of all time, which is the Celestial Kingdom duology by Su Lin Tan. This is adult romantasy. Growing up on the moon, Xing Yin is accustomed to solitude and is completely unaware that she is being hidden by the Celestial Emperor, who exiled her mother to the moon because she stole the elixir of immortality. But when her magic flares and her existence is discovered, she is forced to flee her home and has to leave her mother behind. Alone, powerless, and afraid, she makes her way to the Celestial Kingdom, which is a land of wonders and secrets. Disguising her identity, she seizes an opportunity to learn with the Emperor's son. To save her mother, Xing Yan embarks on a perilous quest, confronting legendary creatures and vicious enemies. But when treachery looms and forbidden magic threatens the kingdom, she must challenge the Celestial Emperor and strike a dangerous bargain that could potentially lead her to losing all that she loves and plunging the realm into chaos. Like I said, this is the best duology I've ever read, and the reason why a lot of duologies don't hit for me is because each book has to be perfectly balanced. For example, with the Letters of Enchantment series, book 1 was all romance, very little plot, and book 2 was all plot, very little romance. And because of that, it wasn't all that compelling. This duology, however, balances the romance and the plot perfectly. It's well written, it has interesting characters, and it has excellent world building. Combined, both books feel like two sides of the same coin. I really enjoyed the evolution of Xing Yin's character in this series. In Daughter of the Moon Goddess, she's very naive, and she's abrasive, and she's trying to find her place in the world. And she has this one singular goal where she's trying to free her mom from the moon. Whereas in book 2, she's a lot more confident in herself and her abilities, and she has goals in the second book that aren't necessarily related to other people. And I really liked seeing that evolution. The romance elements, while not the main plot, do not leave you underwhelmed at all. Another love triangle that's really well done, where you don't know who she's going to end up with at the end. Everyone does have their favorites though, and mine was the one that won. That's all I'm saying. This book does a really good job of showcasing love and how what your brain conveys can war with how you feel. I would recommend this duology to every single person I know because it is so good. One thing I'm realizing while recording this is that YA fantasy is truly that girl. Adult fantasy really needs to step up its game. The next series I would like to recommend to everyone is the Legendborn Cycle by Tracy Dion. It is YA contemporary fantasy. After her mother dies in a tragic car accident, 16-year-old Brie Matthews, she wants nothing to do with the house she lives in, the town she lives in, or any of the memories that remind her of her mother. A residential program for bright high schoolers at UNC Chapel Hill seems to be the perfect way for her to escape, until she witnesses a magical attack on her first night on campus. This includes a flying demon feeding on human energies, a secret society of so-called Legendborn that hunt the creatures down, and a mysterious teenage mage who calls himself Merlin, who attempts and fails to wipe Brie's memory. This failure unlocks Brie's own magic, and with it a memory that connects to the night her mother died. It's really hard to write contemporary fantasy because all of the emphasis is then placed on the magic system and the plot, because the world is already established. For a story like this to be compelling, the plot and the characters have to be exceptional, and they are. Tracy Dion takes the legend of King Arthur and slavery and combines them in such a masterful way, and it constantly left me in awe. It's a masterclass on how you can take pre-existing lore and somehow make it completely your own. This is currently an unfinished series. The first 2 books are out. Book 3 comes out soon, and we have at least one more book coming eventually. easily. It's kind of hard to recommend a series that isn't complete, but I am so confident as Tracy as a writer that I cannot imagine a world in which she disappoints me. This is another story with a really great love triangle. I feel like I'm just proving myself as a liar at this point because I keep saying love triangles are so hard to write, no one does it well, and I feel like this is like the third or fourth series where I've said that a love triangle has been good. So I don't know. I really like how Bree, Selwyn, and Nick all feed off of each other's energy, and it's very electric when you're reading it. Selwyn and Nick are sworn to each other, Selwyn specifically being Nick's protector, and at the same time, they're both very deeply intertwined with Bree. We are literally 2 books in, and I still have no idea who she's going to end up with. If The 7-Year Slip is my favorite romance book of all time, Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood is definitely number 2. This is an adult STEM contemporary romance. Our main character, Elsie, is a theoretical physicist. By day, she's an adjunct professor, grading labs and teaching thermodynamics in the hopes that one day she'll get tenure. And by night, she tries to make up for her non-existent paycheck by being a fake girlfriend. This has all been going well for her until she meets Jack, the annoyingly attractive and older brother of her favorite client, who turns out to be a cold-hearted experimental physicist who ruined her mentor's career and undermined the reputation of theorists everywhere. He's also the same person who runs the physics department at MIT and is standing between Elsie and her dream job. Ali Hazelwood really found her niche in the romance genre, and she's really held on for dear life. Like, these STEM romances are her passion projects. While I had some small issues with the love hypothesis and Love on the Brain, Love Theoretically is really where it all came together for her. The plot, characters, and romance were all impeccably done. You can really see traces of the other 2 books in this one, but this story felt more fine-tuned. If you love a down-bad MMC, rival scientists, and witty banter, you're gonna love this book. Trust me. Next, we have Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. This is an adult fantasy book, and the first book that she's written outside of the Shadowhunters books. In the vibrant city-state of Castellane, the richest of nobles and the most evil of criminals all have one thing in common, which is their constant search for wealth, power, and the next hedonistic thrill. Our main character, Kel, is an orphan and is stolen from the life he knew to become the sword catcher, aka the body double for the royal heir, Prince Connor Aurelian. Lynn Castor is a physician from a small community whose members still possess magical abilities. After a failed assassination attempt brings Kel and Lynn together, they are drawn into the web of the mysterious ragpicker king, who is the ruler of Castellane's criminal underworld. I'm not being dramatic when I say that this might be one of the best fantasy books I've ever read in my entire life. It had great characters, great world building, and a lot of compelling political intrigue. I love when there's a ton of political intrigue in my fantasy books. This story was told between 2 different POVs, and despite that, I felt like I understood all of the characters' motivations. It's so easy just to give each character a POV, cough Game of Thrones cough, but it wasn't needed here. I would argue there isn't a single book out that justifies having a million POVs. I really liked how Kel and Lynn were the vehicles that told this story. Kel constantly towing the line between commoner and royal, which allowed us to see both aspects of this world, while Lynn gave us the access to the only community that has access to magic, and also provided good context on how the class system in this world works. The world building in this book was truly impeccable, and even though we stayed in the same location for the entire story, I really felt like we got to learn about the world as a whole through the plot and character interactions. I just received an early copy of book 2 of the series, The Ragpicker King. I'm so feral, and I'm so excited to see what's going to happen next in this series. And finally, we have the Shades of Magic series by V.E. Schwab, specifically A Darker Shade of Magic, which was my favorite of the series. This is adult fantasy. Our main character, Kel, is one of the last Antari, which are magicians with a rare coveted ability, which allows them to travel between parallel Londons, which include red, white, gray, and at one time, black. Kel was raised in Red London and officially serves the Maresh Empire as an ambassador, traveling between the constant bloody regime of White London and the court of George III in Grey London, aka our world, and also the London with no magic. Unofficially, Kel is a smuggler, servicing people who are willing to pay for even the smallest pieces of a world they'll never see. This is literally the blueprint on how to write a great fantasy series. The concept that there are these 4 unique worlds, and the only thing that they have in common is a city called London, is so fascinating to me. I loved learning about what these Londons had in common and what made them different. All of the elements needed to create a great fantasy series were present. We had high stakes, a great magic system, amazing world building, very interesting characters, and a great plot. V.E. Schwab is such an amazing author, it constantly leaves me in awe. So yeah, those are all the books and series that I would recommend with my entire chest. I also gave a great range of genres, so hopefully there's something that everyone will like, whether you lean YA fantasy, adult fantasy, romance, there's something here for everyone. And if you do read any of these books, I would love to know what you think about them, so leave a comment. If you've already read any of these books and you've loved them, also leave a comment. If you didn't like any of these books, once again, don't tell me. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.